The night was dark and cold, the forest silent except for the sound of leaves moving in the wind. A man named Daniel walked slowly through the narrow path, his lantern in hand, his boots crunching against the wet ground. He was far from home, searching for firewood and maybe some wild herbs for his small camp. The forest was quiet, too quiet, and it made him uneasy. But suddenly he heard something, a sound that was not the wind. It was soft at first, like a weak cry. Almost hidden under the rustle of branches, Daniel stopped, holding his breath. There it was again, this time a low groan, the sound of something in pain. His heart raced, and he tightened his grip on the lantern. He thought it might be a wounded animal, maybe a deer, maybe a wolf hurt by hunters. He hesitated, because in this forest a wounded animal could also mean danger. But Daniel was not the kind of man who ignored suffering, so he followed the sound deeper into the shadows. The cries led him to a small clearing, and there on the ground, half hidden under broken branches. He saw it at first. His mind said it was an animal, covered in strange fur, its body trembling. But then his eyes noticed something that made him step back. The creature's blood was glowing faint blue in the darkness. It pooled on the ground like liquid light. No normal animal had blood like this. Daniel's lantern shook in his hand. He whispered to himself, "What are you?" The creature raised its head slightly, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Its eyes were large, shining like silver glass, and filled with pain. The look in those eyes froze him. It was not the look of a beast, it was something else. Something intelligent, something desperate. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to run, but something inside told him he could not. The creature was dying, and he was the only one there to help. He moved closer, step by step. The smell of metal and burning filled the air. Maybe from its blood, maybe from some weapon. Daniel dropped to his knees beside it. "Easy, easy now," he whispered, though he did not know if it could understand. The creature's body was strange, not like anything he had seen before. Its skin seemed half covered in fur, but also smooth in places. Like silk, its arms were thin, almost human-shaped. But the hands were clawed, and yet something about its face was soft, almost delicate. Daniel tore a strip from his own shirt and pressed it against the wound. The glowing blood soaked through quickly, but he tried again. He knew nothing about alien bodies, but he knew that life was slipping away fast. The creature let out a weak sound. It was almost like a word. Though broken, Daniel leaned close, his heart pounding in his chest. He heard it whisper something that chilled him. "Please." His eyes widened. This was no animal. It spoke. It begged. It understood. Daniel's hands shook as he held the cloth against the wound tighter. His mind raced with questions. Was it dangerous? Was it tricking him? But those silver eyes did not lie. They were full of fear and pain. He looked around the clearing, feeling suddenly exposed. What if someone, or something, was hunting this creature? What if by staying here he had already put himself in danger? The forest seemed to close in on him. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every sound of breaking twigs made him jump. But when he looked down again, the glowing blood, the fragile breathing, the trembling figure, he knew he could not leave it here. Daniel made a choice. He slipped his arms under the strange body. Lifting it carefully, it was lighter than he thought. Fragile, like a broken bird, the creature groaned weakly but did not fight. It rested its head against his shoulder, trusting him for reasons he did not understand. As Daniel carried it through the dark path, the glowing blood dripped behind them, leaving a trail. The thought struck him suddenly. If there was a trail, others could follow. Hunters, predators, or whoever had hurt this creature. His stomach tightened with fear, but his steps did not slow. He just whispered to himself, "Hold on, don't die, not yet." At that moment, he did not know the truth. He did not know that the wounded creature in his arms was no beast. He did not know that it was a princess from beyond the stars. All he knew was that he had found something strange, fragile, and alive. And his choice to save it would change his life forever. Daniel stumbled through the forest with the strange creature in his arms. His lantern swung wildly, shadows moving like ghosts around him. Every step felt heavy, not just because of the weight he carried, but because of the fear rising inside him. He had no idea what he had found, no idea why its blood glowed like fallen starlight. All he knew was that it was alive, and he could not abandon it. The forest seemed endless. But finally he reached a small cave he often used for shelter. It was hidden behind thick vines and moss. almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Daniel pushed inside, his boots crunching against the damp stones. The air was cold and smelled of earth, but at least it was safe. He laid the creature gently on the ground, placing his lantern beside it. The flickering light revealed details he had not seen before. The creature's face was pale, but not in the way of an animal. Its skin was smooth, with faint silver markings running across the cheeks and neck. They glowed faintly in the lantern's light, like veins of moonlight under the skin. The fur he had seen earlier was actually torn fabric, soft and shimmering, not clothes made by hunters or villagers, but something otherworldly. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This was no wounded beast. This was something else, something far more human. He touched the strange cloth carefully. It shimmered under his fingers, smooth like silk yet tougher than leather. The creature stirred, a soft groan escaping its lips. Daniel froze, leaning closer, and then with trembling effort it opened its eyes. They were not animal eyes at all, they were wide, silver and deep. For a moment Daniel forgot to breathe. Those eyes carried intelligence, sorrow, and something that felt almost royal. The creature whispered again, its voice weak but clear enough this time. "Water." Daniel jumped into action. Pulling out a flask from his pack, he helped it drink, holding the flask steady as it sipped slowly. The way it drank was clumsy but deliberate. This was no beast. It was a person. Daniel's mind spun in circles. If it could speak, if it could understand. Then what was it? Why was it here, bleeding and alone in the forest? "Who are you?" Daniel asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. The creature looked at him, lips trembling as if it wanted to speak. But no words came, only a faint whisper of sound. Daniel leaned closer, straining to hear, and then it spoke again, broken and weak. "Not animal, please, help." The word struck him harder than any weapon could. Not an animal, it had said. He was holding something extraordinary. He pressed his palm against his forehead, trying to steady his thoughts. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered to himself. "No one's ever seen anything like you before. Not here, not on this world." The creature tried to sit up, but the pain was too much. Its slender fingers with faint glowing lines gripped his sleeve. Daniel looked down, startled. The touch was gentle, but it was desperate. It looked straight into his eyes, and for the first time he understood something without words. It was afraid, deeply afraid, and it needed him outside the cave. A branch snapped, Daniel's head snapped up, his heart racing. He blew out the lantern quickly, leaving only the faint glow of its blood and markings to light the cave. Shadows moved outside, the sound of heavy steps. Voices spoke in a language he did not understand, low. Harsh and metallic, the creature trembled. Clutching his sleeve tighter, its silver eyes widened with terror. Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, whispering, "Shh, stay quiet." He crouched near the entrance, peering through the vines. 3 tall figures moved through the forest, carrying strange weapons that hummed with energy. They scanned the ground carefully, one of them kneeling to touch the glowing drops of blood. Daniel's stomach turned cold. They were following the trail, the very trail he had left while carrying the creature. The men looked nothing like villagers. Their armor shimmered with alien light, their helmets glowing faint red, hunters, soldiers, or something worse. Daniel turned back to the creature, whispering urgently, "They're looking for you, aren't they?" It nodded weakly, tears shining in its silver eyes. For a second, Daniel thought of leaving, running far away from this madness. But when he saw its fragile body, its trembling lips, the silent plea in its eyes, he knew he couldn't. He could not leave it to them. The voices outside grew louder, moving closer to the cave. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. He grabbed a thick branch lying on the ground, holding it like a weapon. He had no plan, no idea how to fight armored hunters with glowing rifles. But he knew one thing. He would not give them the creature. Not while he still had breath. The soldiers paused just outside. Their weapons scanning, Daniel held his breath. Praying they would move on, the creature clung to him, whispering in broken words, "Please, safe, please." He placed a steadying hand on its shoulder, whispering back, "I'll keep you safe. I promise." Outside, the soldiers argued in their strange tongue. Finally, after long moments of silence, their footsteps began to fade. Daniel exhaled shakily, sweat dripping down his forehead. The danger had passed, for now he turned to the creature again. Its eyes were closed, its breathing shallow. But before it drifted into unconsciousness, it whispered one final word, "Princess." Daniel froze. "Princess?" His heart pounded. What had he just gotten himself into? The word echoed in Daniel's mind like thunder, Princess. He stared at the fragile figure lying on the cave floor, her breathing shallow, her glowing blood still dripping slowly onto the stone. Princess? Of what? Of where? He had no answers, only questions that twisted tighter inside his chest. But before he could think more, the faint glow from the blood outside caught his attention. The hunters had left for now, but the trail was still there. Bright as moonlight, they would come back, maybe with more soldiers, maybe with trackers that could smell her blood from miles away. If they found this cave, both of them would die. Daniel clenched his fist, his mind racing. The alien girl stirred weakly, her silver eyes opening just enough to look at him. Her lips moved, forming words he barely caught. They followed to me. Kill. Her voice broke into coughs, glowing blood staining her chin. Daniel's heart ached at the sight. He knelt beside her, brushing dirt from her torn garment. Not if I can help it, he whispered. More to himself than to her, he knew what he had to do. The cave was no longer safe. They needed to move, and fast. Daniel packed his lantern and supplies quickly, then slid his arms under her again. Lifting her onto his back, she was light, far too light, as if her body was made of nothing but fragile bones and fading strength. Her head rested against his shoulder, and her breath warmed his neck for a moment. He felt the strange weight of responsibility press down on him harder than ever before. The forest outside was silent again. But silence did not mean safety. Every shadow looked alive. Every tree seemed to whisper danger. Daniel moved carefully, his boots sinking into the damp soil. He avoided the trail where the blood had fallen before, stepping instead on rocks and roots. But no matter how careful he was, small drops of glowing liquid still slipped from her wounds, each one landing like a beacon in the dark. His chest tightened, knowing that with every step, he was leaving a signal for the hunters. The night stretched on, the cold wind cutting through his torn shirt. Daniel's muscles burned from carrying her, but he refused to stop. She needed distance between herself and those who hunted her. She needed a chance to live, and for reasons he could not explain, Daniel knew he had to be the one to give it to her. But then, a sound broke through the silence. The deep hum of machines, heavy and unnatural. Daniel froze, pressing his back against a tree, holding her close. Through the branches, he saw light sweeping across the forest floor. Red beams cutting through the night. Hovercrafts, low and sleek, gliding just above the ground. Soldiers marched alongside them, their weapons glowing. Scanning every inch of the forest, they were moving in a wide line. Closing in, Daniel's heart pounded, sweat dripping down his back. If they turned even slightly, they would see him. He held his breath, praying. But the alien girl stirred again, a soft groan slipping past her lips. The sound, though weak, was sharp in the quiet forest. One of the soldiers stopped, raising a hand. The line halted, weapons lifted. Daniel cursed under his breath. The red beam of a scanner swept past his tree. He ducked, clutching her tighter. The beam lingered dangerously close. Then another groan, louder this time. Her pain was betraying them. The soldier barked an order, and the line of soldiers began moving in their direction. Weapons humming, Daniel's mind raced. He could not outrun them, not while carrying her. But maybe, just maybe, he could outsmart them. He looked around, his eyes landing on a thick cluster of rocks leading to a steep ravine. If he could get there, the trail of blood would scatter in the water running below. It was a risk, but it was the only chance. Without another thought, Daniel adjusted her weight on his back and ran. Branches tore at his arms, roots tripped his feet, but he pushed forward with everything he had. The forest exploded with noise behind him, shouts in the strange alien language, weapons firing beams that cut through trees. The night lit up with flashes of red and blue. The hunters were chasing, and they were fast. The princess clung weakly to him, her hands trembling against his shoulders. He could feel her trying to say something, but her words broke apart. Still, he could hear the fear in her voice, the pleading in her breath. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Hold on," he muttered. "We're not done yet." They reached the ravine. The roar of rushing water filling his ears, Daniel did not hesitate. He leapt down, sliding against the rocks, his boots scraping. The cold water hit his legs, numbing him instantly. The current pulled at him, but he held her tight, forcing himself through the flow behind him. Lights swept along the edge of the ravine. Shouts rose as the soldiers searched. But the water carried the glowing blood away, scattering it downstream. Their trail was broken, at least for now. Daniel collapsed against a large stone. Gasping for breath, the princess lay weakly in his arms. Her eyes half open, glowing faintly in the moonlight, her lips parted, whispering one word through the sound of rushing water. "Why?" Daniel blinked at her, confused. "Why what?" he asked, his voice shaking. Her silver eyes shimmered as she breathed. "Why? You help." Fear come for a moment, he had no answer. Why was he doing this? Why risk his life for a stranger? For someone not even from his world? But then, as he looked at her fragile face, her trembling form, the trust she had placed in him without choice, he knew. "Because you needed me," he whispered, his voice steady this time. Her eyes glistened, and before she slipped into unconsciousness, a faint smile touched her lips. Daniel sat there, soaked, exhausted, but alive. The chase had only just begun, and he knew deep inside that the hunters would not stop until they had her. But he also knew one more thing: neither would he. The night dragged on as Daniel and the wounded girl hid deep in the ravine. The water's roar covered their breathing, masking them from the hunters above. But Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before the soldiers spread wider. Before their machines scanned every rock, he could not stay here forever. Slowly, he carried her further downstream until he found a cluster of boulders forming a hollow beneath the cliff wall. It was small, damp, and cold, but hidden. Daniel slipped inside, laying her gently against the stone. Her skin glowed faintly in the shadows, markings along her arms flickering like living light. It was the strangest, most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He tore strips from his own shirt, binding her wounds again. Each time he touched her, she winced softly. But she did not pull away. Her silver eyes fluttered open, watching him silently as if measuring his heart. Finally, her lips parted, her voice weak but clear. "You saved me, again." Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "Yeah, well, seems like I'm making a habit of it." For a moment, there was silence, only the sound of water echoing beyond the rocks. Then, with visible effort, she pushed herself to sit a little higher. Her hands trembled, but her gaze was steady now. "You don't understand," she whispered. Daniel frowned, leaning closer. "Then tell me. What are they? Who are you?" Her silver eyes glistened as though a storm brewed behind them. Finally, she spoke the truth she had been holding back. "I am not a soldier, not a beast," she said slowly. "I am Lyra, daughter of the High Sovereign of Aloria." Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. "I am Princess of the Star Kingdom." Daniel froze, the weight of her words sinking into him like stone. "Princess." She had said it again, but this time not in weakness. Not in whispers, this time she declared it, even with her body broken. He stared at her, unable to believe. "You're telling me you're royalty from another world?" Her faint smile was sad, almost broken. "Yes, and that is why they want me dead." Daniel sat back. Running a hand through his wet hair, he felt dizzy, like the ground had fallen out from under him. He had carried what he thought was a wounded animal, then an alien, and now he was sitting with a princess from the stars. "Why are they hunting you?" he asked finally, his voice low. Lyra's eyes darkened, glowing faintly in the shadows. "Because I refuse to obey," she whispered. "They want war, my father's throne. I refuse to give them my name, my hand, my kingdom. So they tried to silence me." Her words cut through the air like cold steel. Daniel stared at her, trying to piece it together. An alien kingdom, betrayal, a hunted princess. This was something out of legends. Not the life of a simple man like him. And yet here she was, bleeding in his arms, hunted through his forest. He looked at her torn garments again. Yes, not animal hide, but a royal gown ruined by battle and betrayal. The glowing patterns on her skin shimmered faintly like a crown of light. Lyra looked at him suddenly, her voice shaking. "You don't understand the danger. If they find me, they will kill me. And you too, for helping." Daniel met her gaze, his voice steady. "Then we make sure they don't find you." Her lips parted, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Why? Why risk yourself? You are not one of us," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward, his jaw set. "Because no one deserves to die alone in the dirt. Not even a princess from the stars." For the first time since he had found her, Lyra's face softened. Her eyes shimmered with something more than fear, something like hope. A faint tear slid down her cheek, glowing in the lantern light like liquid silver. "Human," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are strange." Daniel gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "You don't know the half of it." Outside, a distant roar shook the forest, the sound of engines, louder than before.
The hunters were sweeping the land, moving closer again. Daniel's heart clenched. He could not hide her forever. She needed real safety, but where could he take a princess from another world? He looked at her fragile form, at the faint glow of her wounds, and in that moment, he made a silent vow. He would not let her be taken, not by soldiers, not by traitors, not by anyone, even if it cost him his life. Lyra reached for his hand, her fingers trembling, but warm. She held it tightly, her silver eyes locking onto his. "You do not know what you promise," she whispered, but Daniel squeezed her hand back. "I don't need to know. I just need to keep you alive." Her lips curved faintly, the first real smile since he had found her, and though the night outside was full of danger, in that small hollow under the rocks, a fragile bond was born, a bond that would decide the fate of more than just one human and one alien princess. It would decide the fate of worlds. The cold air of the ravine pressed against Daniel's skin as the night dragged on. He sat close to Lyra, the alien princess, keeping watch while she rested. Every sound of branches breaking, every whisper of the wind made his hand tighten around the branch he used as a weapon. He had faced many dangers in his life, storms, wolves, hunger, but nothing compared to this. Now he carried the weight of someone far greater, someone whose life could change everything. Lyra stirred, her silver eyes flickering open, weak but aware. Her voice was soft, trembling like the wind through leaves. "You should have left me, human. They will not stop until I am gone." Daniel looked at her and shook his head. "I told you already. I'm not leaving you." She studied him, confused, as if trying to understand a kind of courage she had never seen before. The silence between them grew heavy. Finally, Daniel stood and lifted her again. Her wounds were still bleeding faintly, glowing trails dripping onto his shirt. She let out a small gasp of pain, clutching his shoulder, but she did not resist. She trusted him, even though he was only a stranger. Daniel felt that trust like fire burning in his chest. He could not explain why it mattered so much, but it did. The forest was darker than ever. Clouds hid the moon, and the ground was wet with mist. Daniel carried her across stones, through thorny undergrowth, always listening for the hunter's machines. Her breathing was shallow, her body weak. More than once he thought she might slip away in his arms. Each time he whispered, "Stay with me, princess. Stay awake." And each time, her silver eyes opened just enough to meet his. That was enough to keep him moving. At dawn, the forest lit faintly with gray light. Birds cried out, startled by the echo of distant engines. The hunters were still searching, their machines sweeping the land like angry hounds. Daniel found shelter in the ruins of an old watchtower, long abandoned and broken by storms. He laid Lyra down on the stone floor, covering her with his cloak. The walls creaked in the wind, but it was a safe place for now. She opened her eyes again, looking at him with quiet wonder. "You risked much for me," she whispered. Daniel knelt beside her, washing her wounds with water from his flask. "I'd do it again," he said simply. "But why?" she asked, her voice full of doubt. "You don't know me. You don't know what I am. Why help me?" Daniel paused, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were searching, desperate for an answer. He thought carefully, then spoke slowly. "When I found you, you looked like an animal. But when I looked in your eyes, I saw someone begging not to be left alone. I couldn't turn away." Lyra's lips trembled, her eyes shining faintly with tears. "No one ever said that to me, not even among my own." Her voice ice cracked, and she turned her face away, ashamed. But Daniel gently touched her shoulder. "Well, maybe your people never had humans around." For the first time, a faint laugh escaped her lips. It was weak, but real. Her face softened, the sadness lifting for just a moment. "You are strange, but kind," she said. Daniel smiled. "I've been called worse." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun rose higher, cutting through the mist. For a brief moment, the world seemed peaceful. But they both knew it would not last. As Daniel tightened the bandages on her wounds, Lyra reached for his hand. Her touch was gentle, trembling. "You have done more than I expected from anyone," she whispered. "Among my kind, trust is rare, but I trust you." Daniel felt his chest tighten at her words. Trust, he thought, was heavier than any promise. He nodded slowly, gripping her hand. "Then hold on to that. Because we're not done yet. Not until you're safe." Her silver eyes locked onto his, filled with something new, hope, fragile but real. She whispered, almost too soft to hear, "You are not like others. You are different." Daniel gave a half smile. Good, because different might be what saves us both. The bond between them grew stronger in that ruined tower. It was not spoken in grand promises or long words. It was born in small moments. His steady hands, her quiet trust, the way she leaned on him without fear. And though the hunters still searched the forest, though danger pressed close, in that moment, Daniel and Lyra were no longer just a man and a wounded princess. They were allies, bound together by trust, and that bond would be tested sooner than either of them could imagine. Outside, the sound of engines grew louder again. The hunters were close, closer than ever. But this time, Daniel was ready. He had something to protect now, something he refused to lose, and he would fight with every breath in his body to keep her safe. The morning sun had barely broken through the clouds when Daniel realized the danger was returning. From the ruined tower's cracks, he saw faint red lights sweeping across the mist. The hum of engines grew louder. The alien soldiers were back, and this time they were not searching blindly. They moved with precision, spreading out in wide lines like wolves circling their prey. Daniel's stomach turned cold. He crouched low, his heart pounding, watching their shadows move across the trees. Lyra lay on the stone floor behind him, her silver eyes half closed, her body still weak from blood loss. But even in her state, she knew. "They are close," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They will not stop, not until I am gone." Daniel tightened his grip on the broken spear he had taken from the tower ruins, a simple weapon against their glowing rifles. But it was all he had. His mind raced. He couldn't fight them head-on, not while protecting her. He needed to use the land, the ruins, the forest itself. The soldiers spread around the base of the tower. One of them raised a device that pulsed with red light, a scanner searching for heat, for movement. Daniel pulled Lyra close, pressing her against the cold stone to mask their warmth. He whispered, "Stay still, don't even breathe loud." Her fingers clutched his arm, her trust clear in her frightened eyes. The scanner's light swept past their hiding place. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought they were safe. But then, a faint drop of glowing blood fell from Lyra's wound onto the stone floor. The scanner flashed red, beeping sharply. The soldiers shouted, rushing toward the tower, weapons raised. Daniel's heart hammered. No more hiding. He grabbed Lyra, lifting her onto his back once more. "Hold tight!" he shouted. She wrapped her trembling arms around his neck, and then Daniel ran, bursting through the crumbling wall of the tower, stones collapsing behind him. The forest exploded with sound. Beams of red light hot past him, searing into the trees. Explosions shook the ground as the soldiers fired relentlessly. Daniel zigzagged through the undergrowth, his lungs burning. Branches tore at his skin, dirt sprayed under his boots. Still, he did not stop. Lyra lifted her head weakly, her eyes glowing faintly. With a broken whisper she said, "Left, there." Daniel trusted her, turning sharply into a narrow path. Moments later, energy blasts crashed into the ground where he would have been. Her warning had saved them. Even half-conscious, she was fighting with him. The path led into a deep valley choked with roots and broken stones. Daniel slid down the slope, barely keeping his balance. He hid behind a massive fallen tree, gasping for air. The soldiers' voices echoed above them, shouting orders. Daniel knew they were setting a trap, closing in like a tightening net. He turned to Lyra, whispering harshly, "They're hurting us. They want us cornered." Her eyes were filled with guilt. "This is my fault. They want me, not you. Leave me, human. Save yourself." Daniel shook his head fiercely. "Not happening. You're not dying here. Not while I'm breathing." Before she could protest, a sharp whine cut through the air. A drone, sleek and glowing red, hovered above the trees, its scanners sweeping the valley. Daniel cursed, yanking her deeper under the fallen trunk. But the drone spotted them, its siren wailing. The soldiers charged, their weapons lighting up the valley like fire. Daniel's mind snapped into focus. He grabbed a stone and hurled it at the drone with all his strength. The rock struck its core, sparks flying as it crashed into the trees. But the damage was done. The enemy knew exactly where they were. Lyra's breathing quickened, fear rising in her voice. "They will kill us both." Daniel looked at her and shook his head. "Not if we kill their hope first." He spotted the narrow entrance of a collapsed mine shaft nearby, its mouth hidden by vines. It was small, barely wide enough for them, but it could be a way out, with no time to think. And Daniel pulled her toward it, energy blasts scorching the ground at their heels. They dove inside, rocks crumbling around them as the entrance sealed halfway with debris. Inside, it was dark and suffocating, the air thick with dust. The soldiers outside fired at the rocks, trying to break through, but the shaft went deeper into the earth, twisting away from the valley. Daniel stumbled forward, holding Lyra tightly. Every step echoed in the hollow tunnels. Behind them, muffled explosions shook the ground. The hunters would not give up. Lyra pressed her forehead against his shoulder, whispering weakly, "They will follow. They always follow." Daniel's voice was hard as iron. "Then let them. They'll find out humans don't run forever." As they pushed deeper into the mine, the faint glow from Lyra's markings lit the darkness like stars. Her strength was fading, but her eyes still held trust. And Daniel, exhausted and bloodied, felt that trust like a fire inside him. The hunters had cast their net, but he would tear it apart, piece by piece, if it meant keeping her alive. The mine shaft stretched on like a throat of stone. Daniel staggered through the dark, every step heavy, every breath sharp. His arms ached from carrying Lyra, but he refused to stop. Behind them, faint rumbles echoed. The soldiers were blasting through rock, hunting them even in the earth itself. The tunnel widened into a cavern where water dripped steadily from the ceiling. The faint glow of Lyra's markings lit the stone walls like constellations. Daniel set her down gently on a flat rock, brushing dirt from her silver hair. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, but her eyes still burned with a strange light. She whispered, "You should have left me. They will not stop until one of us dies." Daniel shook his head firmly, gripping her trembling hand. "Then I guess we'll just have to make sure it's not you." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. They couldn't run forever. Sooner or later the hunters would corner them again, and there would be no escape. And yet, giving up was not an option. Not when her fragile trust weighed heavier than any crown. The cavern trembled with distant explosions, dust falling from above. Lyra stirred, her lips trembling with words she had been holding back. "You don't understand, human. My life is not just my own," she whispered. "If I die, my people will fall into war. If I live, there is hope for peace." Her silver eyes filled with tears, glowing faintly in the dark. "I am not just Lyra. I am a promise to my people. That is why they hunt me." Daniel's heart clenched. She wasn't just a princess in title. She was the key to something far greater, and somehow, by fate or by chance, he had become her shield. He tightened his grip on the spear in his hand. "Then we make sure you live. Whatever it takes." Before she could answer, a deafening crack split the cavern wall. Rubble exploded inward as soldiers stormed through, their armor glowing crimson in the dust. Their weapons lit up the cavern like lightning, red beams searing across the stone. Daniel threw himself in front of Lyra, the spear raised. He dodged one blast, then another, hurling the spear into the nearest soldier. The weapon struck true, knocking the alien back in a spray of sparks, but more poured in, surrounding them, their red visors glowing like demons in the dark. Daniel grabbed a fallen blade from the ground, swinging wildly. Every strike was fueled by desperation, by the fire of protecting something he barely understood. But he was only one man, and they were too many. Then it happened. A sudden burst of light exploded from behind him. Daniel turned just in time to see Lyra rising weakly to her feet, her hands glowing with blinding energy, her markings flared like fire, her silver eyes burning with raw power. She cried out in her alien tongue, and a wave of light swept across the cavern. The soldiers staggered, blinded. In their weapons sparking, some fell, crushed under falling rocks as the cavern shook from her power. Daniel shielded his eyes, staring in awe. She was no helpless girl now. She was every inch the princess she claimed to be. Her power was breathtaking, terrible, and beautiful all at once, but the effort tore through her fragile body. Her knees buckled, her light fading as she collapsed back into his arms. The cavern was in chaos, soldiers retreating, rocks falling. But then, a new light filled the chamber. Through the shattered ceiling above, a massive ship descended, its hull shimmering silver and blue. Figures leapt down. Tall, regal, their armor bearing the crest of a star. They knelt as one before the fading princess. One voice rang out, "Your Highness, we have come for you." Daniel's breath caught. These were her loyal guards, the ones she thought lost. They rushed forward, lifting her carefully, shielding her from the last of the enemy soldiers. For the first time since he found her, Daniel felt a flicker of relief. Lyra, weak but conscious, reached for his hand as they carried her. Her silver eyes locked onto his, tears shimmering. "You saved me, Daniel, when no one else would," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but her words cut deep into him. "I will never forget you. Not in this life. Not in the stars beyond." Daniel's throat tightened. Words stuck in his chest. He could only nod, holding her hand until her guards pulled her away. He watched as they lifted her onto the shining ship, its engines humming like thunder. The hunters scattered, fleeing as the loyal fleet arrived, their net broken, their plan shattered. And then, with one final look back, Lyra smiled weakly at him, not as a princess, not as royalty, but as someone who had found trust, kindness, and hope in a human stranger. The ship rose into the sky, carrying her beyond the clouds. Daniel stood in the ruins, battered, scarred, but alive. He had started the night thinking he found a wounded animal, but he ended it knowing he had saved a princess who might change the galaxy. And though she was gone, her promise echoed in his heart, that somewhere among the stars she carried his name, and the bond they forged in blood and fire would never be broken.